we were in the process of talking about written and unwritten constitution. Yes. So we told that written constitution, the last is sanctity. The written constitution has sanctity. When we adopt a written constitution, so it is difficult to change. Like say that we have also adopted a written constitution, this 1949, and so far we continue that constitution with some, let's say that 100 plus amendments. This, when we say sanctity, the sanctity means it cannot be easily amended, it cannot be easily changed. And why it cannot be easily changed, or why we try to maintain certain standards in that, so that whatever we have written in constitution, we consider those things important. They should not be tempered. You can see that often when there is a tussle between government and judiciary, so ultimately it is the constitution which tries to solve the matter. The constitution will become basis. Government will say that this is how the constitution says. Judiciary will say that this is how the constitution says. So constitution becomes many a time basis for even solving conflicts. And those areas where constitution lacks clarity, so that gives rise to conflicts. This, like let's say whether Delhi should be a full state or a half state, things are going on. That's why we use the term sanctity, which it cannot be changed very easily. But when you have unwritten constitution, so it is considered flexible. And when it is flexible, so it can be changed easily. So unwritten constitution is considered, in fact, most flexible. Because in the name of constitution, what you have to change? Unwritten constitution means there is no one law as fundamental law. Rather, there is a set of laws, rules, acts, charters, conventions, judicial orders, legal books. They can together constitute as constitution. So that way we consider it. So those things can be changed. That we can consider. That is how the difference we can say between a written constitution and unwritten constitution. Then next question comes, and that next question is that why UK did not adopt a written constitution? Why most of the countries have a written constitution? No. So why do we need a written constitution? Why do we need a written constitution? So in one term, if we say, to promote constitutional governance. freedom. Yes. So when we have constitutions, constitution promotes this, you can say that constitution will promote constitutional governance, which will realize time to time. Then it is a polity, which means polity or government should act as per the constitution. Then it is rule of law. Or let's say that it is need, let's say, for any democracy now. Any democracy, any state should necessarily have a written constitution, which has become an essential aspect, without which it is difficult to run any such democracy. You can see that even if we have constitution, still there is huge arbitrariness problems, other this and that problems. Right. Constitution is example, you can say that it is like, let's say that Krishna sitting on the chariot of Arjuna. This like. So constitution is a light for the any government, let's say, and it protects the rights of citizens. Even if we have constitution, it's still, you know, that rights are not protected. So when constitution will not be there, then what will happen? As of now, the buck stop at constitution. You also say that it is my constitutional right. You also say it is my fundamental right, which is protected under constitution. Yes. It gives hope to people. That is how we can consider. Then the question is why US adopted and why US adopted. And why UK did not. No. Why a need has not been felt in UK to adopt a constitution. Even there is no debate on that. And US became the first country. So why it adopted? So basically it was a colonial country. Means it was British colony. So after independence, when they had their war of independence, so they wanted to adopt a constitution so that the government could not exploit people. They had seen the exploitation by colonial powers. You know how colonies do. British colony, you know that in India. So a colonial power has exploitative nature. Like say British rule in India was known as also police state. And you know history, you read history that what it did in our country. So, and gradually you will learn, many a time you hear also that colonial hangover. So many things happen, then you say that it is colonial hangover. Bureaucracy also has colonial hangover. Police also has colonial hangover when police torture, lock up dates. So these are all British type of system. But these things started during British time. So since it was a colony of British, so that's why when they got independence, they wanted to adopt a system which no longer became exploitative. They wanted to guarantee it, safeguard it, To guarantee it or safeguard it, you need something, sanctity. This, and that's why a written constitution was adopted. This, and that's why bills of rights, you know that, fundamental rights. So the first country to adopt fundamental rights, we'll talk in fundamental rights though. Why we say it fundamental? What is the idea behind fundamental rights? It's not merely that it will help in realization of potential. It is much more than that, which will help you in understanding the relationship between government, state and people. This. So they wanted to adopt a constitution which can guarantee the rights to people, which can save people from exploitation, arbitrary exercise of powers. Hence, it also adopted most rigid process of amendment of constitution. The US constitution is most rigid constitution in the world. Our constitution is 2/3. Their constitution is 3/4. This 3/4 majority. And only, let's say, 27 to 30 around times its constitution has been amended. And we have amended in 70 years, more than 100. This, that way you can understand. So it was to guarantee, let's say that, guarantee rights with people. Plus blah blah, let's just understanding it is. So it became the most rigid. That is how the idea behind this. That is how the idea that they went for complete separation of powers. US is the only country which also went for complete separation of powers. What do we mean by complete separation of powers? 3 organs of the state. There is complete separation. You can see how Biden government is struggling. Fiscal deficit. And then whether Congress will approve or not. Have you ever found in our country, this government is struggling, fiscal deficit? You will not hear also. Because they will fund it. And a supplementary grant will be introduced in parliament which will not make news at all. Right. A vote on credit will be introduced. Additional grant bill will be introduced. You will not notice. You know only about budget. You do not know that there are other bills when additional grant government needs. But it does not make any news. Separation. Anyhow, so that is how you find that it guaranteed. That is what it adopted, a written constitution. And then it became, let's say that, a role model. Most of the countries now started imitating, learning from US constitution, including we have also learned from US constitution. We have tried to adopt a written constitution, try to adopt a rigidity in the constitution, the rigidity aspect, and then we have also incorporated fundamental rights and also separation of powers, which we'll talk you later on, let's say that. Now, if you take UK, it was not a colony. That its historical past is that, right? It has not been a colony. Rather, it is colonizer. It is a colonizer rather than a colony. Yes. However, let's say that it is a land where most of the things started developing. Most of the things, as we told, Magna Carta. This. So Magna Carta, you can see this. This 1215. Right. Plus other charters, as we told, English Revolution. Rule of law. This. So it is a country, let's see, where people underwent democratic changes. What has happened? People underwent democratic changes. People underwent democratic changes. What does it mean? So when democracy was adopted in India, Constitution was also adopted in India. You know what B.R. Ambedkar remarked? He told that democracy in India was a top dressing. Democracy in India was top dressing. What does it mean? This. So the question is this. Let's understand what is like that. See, change. Change, let's say that first you can have behavioral change. And we have institutional change. This. When people undergo behavioral changes, change come in them, right? Let's say democracy comes within us. So people underwent democratic change in UK, and it's such a long duration. The long duration you can say is the Magna Carta 1215 onwards. It is a long duration. This. Plus they have fought for their rights. Right, fight between people and monarch, right, and religion and secularism, overthrowing theology. This, they have rejected church. They have, let's say, they talked about secular aspects, liberty, equality, freedom, all these things. So that way you have to understand. That is how institution, let's say that people first underwent behavioral changes. Once they have gone behavioral changes, they have become democratic. Then you need less institutions to bring change in behavior. This. And all developing countries have not gone behavioral changes. Hence, you need institutions to bring behavioral changes. So, developing countries like us, we have institutionalized changes. The term you may at times find, we have institutionalized change. Like we adopted 5-year planning commission to bring socio-economic changes in society, which is now being done by Niti Ayog. This you have heard Niti Ayog. How to take it, understand it by example. This. So let me tell that we take dowry. Then tell why we take dowry. But dowry is prohibited. Dowry is prohibited in law. It is illegal. But those who are going to enforce law, IAS, they take dowry. And they take highest level of dowry. No. But this practice you will not find in Western countries. First, you will not have a Dowry Prohibition Act. And second, people do not take dowry. Neither law is needed, nor it is in practice. Why? Why? Because there people have gone behavioral changes. They have rejected parochial society. They have rejected feudal society. This. So, modern democracy, modern state, when it emerged in their country, they rejected theocracy, feudal society and parochial society. This, which introduced equality. In actual practice, they practice equality and freedom. But in our society, Equality is in only name, not in practice, because our behavioral changes have not happened. Hence, since behavioral changes have not happened, how you want to bring behavioral change? By creating institution, by law, by programs and schemes and policy of the government. That is how the Dowry Prohibition Act, this kind of law you will have. And that is how you will find this. So, by this you want. So, hence, to bring institutionalized change, you will need institution and you will need law, and then also you will need constitution. But since their society has gone behavioral changes, they have not felt any such need. They have not felt need to bring any constitution. I will finish it. Let me finish. So, since they themselves have evolved, democracy has evolved, parliamentary democracy has evolved, a system of government has evolved, people are very active. You can see it is a country where you have a person who is prime minister. That prime minister belonged to a country which once it was colony. And that colony country, let's say one person becomes prime minister of colonizer. And there is no debate in UK that there is a conspiracy by India to one day govern UK. Although it is very easy to run that conspiracy. As in our country, everything has now conspiracy. Isn't it? So, there is no also debate in UK. Then you can understand their democracy. It can have space for any other person who is part of that UK. Even a person from foreign origin can also become prime minister. This, and people will allow it to happen. Isn't it? This is democracy. Right. So, and in our country still we are entangled with caste and religion, isn't it? You know it better. Gradually you will know it, yes. Referendum, 2009. Yes, when they want to bring any change, that is how they wanted to shift from. We'll teach you in Representation of People Act when we'll take that topic. So when they wanted, there is a debate even in our country that we should change our system of election. Our system of elections is based on first past the post system. They have also the same system, but it is not considered as a good system of election. Hence, there is a demand that we should change to proportional representation. So, a referendum was done to bring proportional representation. It was defeated in referendum. Same thing for Brexit also. They wanted to withdraw from European Union and a referendum was done. This time people supported that Brexit, separation. So, a decision is taken on the basis of what people think. Because of that. But this is how democracy is. Although it is also challenging at times. This you can say. So, what we are trying to say, this is how you need to understand. UK has not felt a need for that. US felt a need for that. Because it was a colony. It wanted to guarantee that to people some rights, which even state could not take away. And that was possible only by a written constitution. But in UK, since it has evolved itself, including rule of law concept, so they have not felt a need to be governed by one legal written document. They have a set of legal written documents, you can say, which help them in governing. And that way we can consider. So, UK is also democratic, US is also democratic. This is right. And the society is also highly homogeneous society. This, It is homogeneous. So further we'll talk when we take other things. And that is how we can say about constitution. As far as India is concerned, so say we got independence, we are a transitional society, and trend is that any country should have a written constitution. This, it is very difficult not to have a written constitution, otherwise governments may exercise powers arbitrary manner. The trend is that most of the countries have constitution. This is true. That is how we can finish our one debate related to constitution. Right. So then we'll take about evolution, let's say that process. Right. Process and means evolution of constitution. This. So any constitution that we adopt, it is not adopted in a day. Let's take US. You know that it was independent in 1776. Independence it got, but its constitution came into effect. This. So what we find, almost 10 years. So US first it got independence, then its constitution was adopted. This. In case of, let's say that India, we started the process in 1946. This you can say that. So 1946 will find, and then it goes to 1949. This. And meanwhile we got independence. Our process starts before independence and just it ends after independence. This, isn't it? It is generally, it we say 2 years, right? What? 11 months and 18 days. This. So there is a process, let's say that. Any constitution, you know that. So it is a constitution which is written after independence. Ours is a constitution which process started before independence. This. So anyhow, since we were supposed to get independence, that is how the Constituent Assembly, etc. So what they did is, after independence, they started formulating their constitution by educating people, making people aware. The leaflets were distributed among people, and other things, let's say, is to reach out to people, talk to people, take their views and opinion. So even their constitution was also framed by people's direct or indirect participation. But in our constitution, no people participation. It is presumed that the representatives, those who are indirectly elected, they represent people. This you should know that. So this is how to find the difference, but that's not important to know. Let's take that when we have started evolution. Basically, let's say this evolution has its own historical context. It has its own historical context. We have to know this historical context. And then let's say that you have to know about making of constitution. Making of constitution. And then we'll talk once constitution is made. Then we'll talk its what are the broad features of the constitution, nature of constitution, other details we'll talk. So any constitution has its own background that we can say about historical context. So let's take on this historical context. Now, this historical context is related to 1773 to 1947. This is the historical context. So, or if you go since 46 we started, so 35 also can be written. This, it gives you view. This, it influences. This is also called evolution of constitution, you can say, or it is also known as or we say also it as constitutionalism. We say it as constitutionalism. This will tell you constitutionalism a bit later. Constitutionalism, we expect one day a question on the term constitutionalism. So far they have not asked any question related to that. So today and tomorrow they will ask. But they have asked constitutional morality as a question. This in polity also, first question was asked in 2021. In ethics paper also it was asked in 2020. This both places they have asked. Anyhow, so this regulating act are basically we can divide. So 1773 to 1853. It can be divided into two parts, and second is 1850, 1935. This is considered as the act of centralization. This is considered as decentralization. Simple, let's say that they introduce which were incorporated in the constitution. Why we are trying to talk this historical aspect? So first is UPSC has asked question also. Yes. And second is that it has influenced our constitution. After all, what is that constitution? Constitution is a legal document which talks about machineries of the government. When it talks about machineries of the government, can we say it is completely new? No. Can we say that whatever the content Constitution has, it is new? The Constitution has its different sources, isn't it? Which later on also we'll talk. Any Constitution. The Constitution has sources. Those sources influence that Constitution, isn't it? Like our Constitution is influenced by our philosophy, Indian philosophy. Can we say Indian Constitution is influenced by our philosophy? This. And then it is influenced by history. Whatever the historical past we have, it is influenced. Then it is influenced by world constitutions. And then it is influenced by these four factors. Four components have influenced our constitution. This Indian philosophy, when we talk about welfare, when we talk about brotherhood, when we talk about Satyamev Jayate, this. So these are all part and parcel of Indian philosophy. This. Similarly, let's say when we talk about history, this is how historical past we are trying to deal. The history has also influenced constitution. And then let's say that we have learned from others' constitution. That is how say world constitution. And then a spirit of freedom struggle movement. Nehru report, you know that. So, spirit of freedom struggle movement, that time whatever those, because all those members of the Constituent Assembly were part and parcel of freedom struggle movement. And they influence provisions of the Constitution. This, that is how we say spirit of freedom struggle movement. These are four major components of which we are trying to understand this. Historical, let's say, there are factors. The historical factors which have influence. The historical factors we are telling about this. And in this, let's say, there are historical factors, you'll find questions. If you talk from UPSC perspective, the questions have been asked largely related to Government of India Act 1935. If you read repeatedly questions they have asked related to Government of India Act 1935, and again they will ask. That is how UPSC. Some of the things it repeats, it keeps repeating. This we have to know. Again they will ask, what others we expect, basically. There are various acts, let's say that. So let's write those acts, then we'll talk. We have, let's say, Regulating Act, 1773. Then we have this one part. Second is second part. We are dealing with those acts which are relevant for polity section. You will study also for your history section as well as for prelims. So all those things will be covered. Here we deal only what is relevant for our polity section. In fact, when we start polity, so we start with this, isn't it? Many a time you may have read this acts, this and that acts. Anyhow, so as we told that UPSC, so UPSC has asked this repeatedly. Now, if they can change and they can ask any other such act, so what are those likelihood? What are those acts can be asked? So we can expect this question from this, and then we can expect this plus this. There are three other possibilities that they can ask a question. Because they do have also substance that you can write more than factuals related to that act. That's how, let's say, that it can be asked. Right. This, and that's why we'll try to deal them. So what happens basically? You know that those acts are evolution. So first evolution started like, wait, they got Diwani right, isn't it? It was East Indian Company. If you know a bit of history, East Indian Company, it was a commercial entity. And this commercial entity entered in India by getting Diwani rights for, let's say, some of the three states related or province related. It is called beginning. This once, let's say that the beginning is done, then gradually you will find that it results into 1773 a regulating act is passed. And when a regulating act is passed, so this East Indian Company assumes some political and administrative role. It assumes some political and administrative role. This. Then further down the line, let's say, if you see, by 1833, it became fully administrative entity and its commercial entities, etc. were done away with commercial role. So fully administrative body. Or administrative role. So when they have gone into, let's say that having an administrative role, so gradually what they do, they will try to establish a system of polity. Because they have to govern. Right. So gradually, let's say since then, you'll find that since then to 1935, I will summarize here that a system of polity was established. As well as a system of administration, but since we are dealing polity, we'll focus on that. The system of polity is established. And when we get, let's say that independence, so can we completely dissociate from this? Right. So we may not be able to completely dissociate. This is how the past legacy. Yes. So here we continue. Continuity of past legacy. That is how it becomes debatable after independence, even at times today. Should we discontinue British legacy or we should continue British legacy? Because some of the still British legacies continue. No, district administration, you enjoy it. District administration, district magistrate is a British legacy. No any country in the world has this kind of system where DM has such authority. This is law. Except to some extent in France, prefect. There is a position named prefect. That is counterpart of district magistrate. Otherwise, no country has. And they created it. So that way we can consider. So legacy, let's say that it is debated at times, should we have, but that's later on, let's say, our aspect. So you have to know that is how we have to know that what are those some broad characteristics of their past which we incorporated or we were influenced. This, and that way it will help you understanding British, let's say that administration, British rule, and then our rule after independence. Yes, how it is different from that. So, if in brief we will talk, so generally we start talking like this. So, Regulating Act 1773. Basically what they did is, first they try to concentrate powers. This you should know that. First they try to get more and more powers, and that is to centralize powers. Once they centralize powers, then they realize that the centralization of power creates problem. Hence they started decentralizing. This lesson you can learn in today's context. When we'll deal our polity and we'll teach, we'll say how it is centralized, you can learn. That is how it gives the benefit. The history helps in understanding present better. Yes. So 1773 is the foundation which gave basis for centralization of powers. Right. And that brief features I will dictate, although you can read Lakshmikant, it's given everything, notes also, this is how either way you can read. So, what happened? That British, let's say that, they, by regulating act, they gave powers to Governor of Bengal, right, by making him as Governor General of Bengal. The Governor of Bengal was made superior to Governor of Madras and Bombay. This was first development. Second important development was the Legislative Council powers of, you find that Executive Council, let's say that, the powers of Madras and let's say that Bombay. No, it was done in 1833. Here what they did is that they made Governor of Bengal superior to Governor of Bombay and Madras by naming him as Governor General, and first such Governor General was Lord Warren Hastings. That is all fine. Now when they gave power to Governor General of Bengal, so it is like aspiration of political power. It was a company, and company is getting political power, administrative power, this is all fine. Although there were some other features also known as that Supreme Court was also established, this you can say. Yes, and Governor General Executive Council was also established. The Governor General Executive Council is nothing but to advise Governor, which is similar to Prime Minister office now. This way you should know. You have Chief Minister's office, Prime Minister office, PMO you may be knowing. This is how the origin of PMO, the sort of origin of PMO as Executive Council. And that way it is said that a centralized foundation of system of polity was laid down. Then when this act was adopted, so in that act it is also mentioned that the act implementation would be reviewed and further it would be improved. That's why one after another act you get. So then another act came After this was considered Pitt's India Act. This Pitt's India Act, that is called 1784. Now what it did, so it created a dual system of government. This Court of Directors, Board of Control. Company, East Indian Company was governed by Court of Directors. And above that, Board of Control was created. The Board of Control will control the affairs of company. So in a way, now the British government took Indian territory into its possession. This was through Board of Control. Hence, it became a more fully, let's say, defined political entity. And a dual system of government was introduced. That is how the development will find in Pitt's India Act. Then further, let's say, we went for this 1833 Major Act. Now, what it did is, it further centralized power. What it did, so it is in this act that the legislative councils of Madras and Bombay were divested. Right. They were done away with. And that power was given in the hand of Governor General. And now Governor General was made as Governor General of India. Means British, let's say, possession of territory. The Governor General of Bengal became Governor General of India. This you can say. And powers, legislative council powers were divested of Madras and Bombay. It is further centralization of power. Right. And first such Governor General was William Bentinck. At this stage, they tried to introduce also open competition, but it was not accepted. Let's say in civil services, they tried to bring open competition, but it was not accepted. And then finally, let's say that the act of this consolidation will find. So it was 1853. And by this 1853, what they did is, Executive Council was divided as Executive Council and Legislative Council. Now, Executive Council was divided into two bodies. One Executive Council, another Legislative Council. And it is this Legislative Council which can you consider as origin for our Parliament. This, because it became a legislative body, it started resembling its functioning as a legislative body, discussion, deliberations, motions like this, and gradually it was converted into Legislative Council, let's say, Representative and Council of State by Government of India 1919 Act. This and Executive Council, let's say, it continued. That is first major change. Second major change was an open competition was introduced. This is considered. Now, it was on the basis of this act that Macaulay Committee was constituted. It is not the first Macaulay Committee and then act was adopted. First, the law promised for open competition. That's why Macaulay Committee was constituted in 1854 and the Charter Act is 1853. That's how the difference you find. Then, you know that meanwhile what happens? 1857, revolt. So when revolt happens, it changes entire approach of British rule in our country. This. And now let's say that what they started, what they realized that by this centralization, they would not be able to govern India. They need to decentralize. What is decentralization? They need to incorporate aspirations of people in process of governance. Means they need to associate more and more Indians in British administration. that will fulfill their aspirations. And when it will fulfill their aspirations, so there is a less chance for revolt. That is how it is called decentralization. So this is a process of, we say it as centralization. And then let's say that X comes. It is 1858 Act. Now, you should know hereafter, try to understand how to remember, especially for prelims, or some of the factuals, let's say that. You know when, in which act, what major initiative is taken. And hereafter you will know in which act, what major initiative is discontinued and what new things are introduced. That way you can relate and you can remember. So we told that here they introduced dual government. That dual system was abolished. Now board of control was abolished. Court of director also abolished. This you should know that. Now it is the British Crown which directly took the control over the Indian affairs. And Governor General came to be known as Viceroy. This first. Second, they created, let's say, a new designation called Secretary of State. And Secretary of State was a member of British Cabinet, representing in UK Parliament. And Secretary of State was given the, let's say that, role of Indian Affairs, as means he was responsible to British Crown through Parliament. Hence, Secretary of State controlled Viceroy in India, and Viceroy in India was responsible to Secretary of State. And Secretary of State discharged his role and duties by having a council consisting of over 15 members. So that changes were introduced. This act is considered act of good government. Why it is considered act of good government? This is important. We'll talk to you a bit later. Act of good government, it is considered simply because you should know that British Parliament became basis for exposing British rule in India. Those Indian origin members started exposing British rule in India in their British Parliament through their debate and discussion, and let's say that they also exposed Britain on the basis of its dual standards. Britain promised liberty, freedom to its own citizens, but it was exploiting in colonial countries. Because of that, it became act of good government. Which separately when we'll dictate, we'll talk it. So this is what we'll find that a kind of responsible government was introduced. You should know that we adopted parliamentary democracy, and main aim of parliamentary democracy is responsible government. And that responsible government origin you can trace in modern times from this 1858, this way. Now further let's say that two such council act you'll find. This is called 1861 and 1892. They are not major developments from mains perspective, but you should know some factual aspect. So, Council Act 1861 restored the Legislative Council of Madras and Bombay, which was taken away by 1833 Act. 1833 Act divested Legislative Council of Madras and Bombay, and 1861 Act restored it. It is Act of Decentralization. So 1861 Act is known for Act of Decentralization. This is true. And it introduced also system of representation, especially in Governor General, Viceroy, Executive Council and Legislative Council. The representations were, let's say, nominations were done, some Indians were associated, so that is called representation. So 1861 is known for introducing a system of representation and introducing system of decentralization. Yes, that is how its relevance. Now here, let's say, indirect elections were also introduced. In the councils, some members will be indirectly elected. So a system of indirect election was introduced by 1892. That's why this act is known for system of indirect election. Although the term election was not yet used. Then finally, let's say that we come for Government of India Act 1919. What it does? You should know. So, when we say for the first time system of election was introduced. For the first time a system of election was introduced, that is called direct election. We are skipping this called Morley Minto reform because it is not relevant for polity section. It is more relevant for your history section. No. Communal award and all these blah blah things. So, in Government of India Act 1919, what they did is, first a system of direct election was introduced. So, when direct election will be introduced, so legislature has to be constituted at union and state level. So, legislature has to be constituted. So, they also introduced bicameral legislature. This bicameral legislature means House of People and Legislative Council, you can say, or Council of State, you can say. Interestingly, you should know that the Council of State had also direct election of members. That time, they were also directly elected. The bicameral legislature, system of election, introduced. And when you introduce a legislature, elected members, so legislatures will make law also. Right? You cannot create legislature without provision for making law. So for that, they had to divide subjects. So subjects were divided. So transferred subject and reserved subject. Transfer means for the first time, subjects were divided. And that is how transferred subject means on those subjects, legislatures were empowered to make law, debate and discuss. And let's say reserved subject remain in the control of Governor General or Governor of the province. This came to be known as diarchy. Dual rule, let's say you can consider. But this diarchy is different from past diarchy. Board of Control, Code of Directors. Because it is subject division. And this subject division is early stage of three types of lists. Federal list, provincial list and concurrent list, or early stage of Schedule 7 when we have adopted Constitution. That way we can consider the link. So once you introduce, let's say that direct election, bicameral legislature, diarchy system, so you will have a responsible government. There will be a responsible government, let's say that. So hence, responsible government here becomes now elected government. But in 1858, responsible government was through British Parliament. But now in India itself, there would be legislatures as elections were held. So that way we can consider. And finally, its culmination is this, 1935. What did 1935 says? 1935 says that in 1919 Act, as we have told in 1773 also, that when they pass an act, in that act they mention that it would be reviewed and again restructured. When Government of India Act 1919 was introduced, So it was mentioned that its implementation would be reviewed after 10 years. This. But you know that before completion of 10 years, Simon Commission was sent. This, and go back, Simon, in history you read all these things. Oh, the Simon Commission was sent. And it was Simon Commission which reviewed the implementation of 1919 Act, and it submitted a paper to the British Parliament that is called White Paper. A white paper was introduced, and that became basis for adoption of Government of India Act 1919. Since it became on the basis of review, they further, let's say, took this act, let's say that, improved it. That is how now transferred subject, resort subject abolished, and it was given a full shape of lists. Federal list, provincial list, and concurrent list. It means that federal polity was introduced. And this federal polity was introduced with a centralizing tendency. Because residuary power would lie in the hand of Governor General. And at the same time, let's say that now at center, let's say they introduce diarchy. Center what diarchy they introduced, that the subjects were divided. For Governor General means Viceroy and legislature. This plus elections were also expanded in other provinces, and bicameral legislature was also further expanded. At the same time, there are some other provisions of this act which are less known, just they are important to add three more points. More than that, they do not have relevance. One is called RBI Act. RBI was also created as per this act. This you can find. And similarly, let's say that we had provision for Union Public Service Commission, that is called Federal Civil Service Commission, Joint Civil Service Commission, and Provincial Civil Service Commission. So there were, let's say that those provisions will find. So what you are finding is that now gradually they have consolidated the power, they have centralized the powers, and they are decentralizing the power. It is centralization, so it is decentralization. Yes. So they have associated. In the process, what they have done is they have gone into establishing a polity, a system of polity. Because you know that they will have, there is legislature, it is a bicameral legislature. There is elected government, responsible government, this you can find. Then federal polity, subject divided, and it controls administration. Then there are other lesser known things that local government was also introduced. Lord Ripon Resolution 1882, local self-government. So they went on establishing a system of polity. At the same time, they had also provided legal basis for that system of polity. Because these laws are somehow providing legal basis, including you know that they had provision for portfolio system, ordinances were issued. So that way we can consider, and these things have influenced when we were trying to frame our constitution. Because when we have adopted our constitution 47 after, we did not have any democratic experience of running government. Whatever the experience we had, so they were just by this. Our leaders did not have any democratic experience to run government when we got independence. Whatever we had little experience, that was by Government of India Act 1919. That way we can consider. Now the question is that even if they have decentralized, does it mean there was decentralization? In other way around, even if it appears it is decentralization, but it is still highly centralized. This is should know. It is still highly centralized. So what question is asked? Now, a question is asked on this. Generally, a question is asked on this, and this question is, it is linked to our constitution. It is linked to our schedule 7. Generally, a question is asked, since schedule 7 is nothing but a sort of extension of Government of India Act 1935. Hence, it makes, let's say, Indian constitution centralized. Yes. It makes centralized. Second, it constitution. So, constitution is not original, rather copied. This. Because 1935 Act also gave details of administrative machineries, which we incorporated in Schedule 7, because Schedule 7 deals with administrative machinery. But here it seems there is decentralization. But question is being asked, it is making centralized. This is how you should know. Even if it appears in this context, it appears it is decentralized. But if you see in actual practice, it is still highly centralized. Right. And this legacy goes to this. So, our Indian administration foundation, the administration that you are going to join, modern foundation is laid down by 1773 Act, and that is centralized. That's why Indian administration highly remains centralized, which we enjoy. This largely bureaucracy enjoys it, because centralization means more powers, and powers, you know that people enjoy it. This, like district magistrate, again I will tell, although it is just second class, but anyhow, district magistrate, suppose district magistrate position is abolished, then will you join still civil services? No. So it means we will try to sustain the power of district magistrate. Yes, we'll try to continue the power of district magistrate. We'll talk one day when we take local governments. In other countries, local governments leaders are more popular than district magistrate counterpart. Yes. And they play bigger role than administrators. In our country still, bureaucracy plays bigger role, which will take time to understand what exactly we are trying to say. This. So, what we will say is that historical, let's say when we say historical underpinnings, this is also historical underpinnings. Historical underpinnings are centralized system. That's why at times you can hear in articles, if you read newspaper, you will read, at times you will find how Indian administration is highly centralized, government is highly centralized. Raghuram Rajan keeps at times criticizing India is excessively centralized country. There is a high level of centralization of powers. And that legacy goes to 1773 Act. Now, even if they have tried to decentralize, but you know that they did not have a noble cause to serve to people. They try to associate Indians so that they can fulfill their objectives, not fulfill people's objective. Right. And that was that to further promote imperialism. Right. So, by association of people, you wanted to promote imperialism because it will help. As people will not protest, they will not revolt. Hence, even if they were trying to decentralize, but it was highly discriminatory. You know that they tried their best to bar Indians to get associated and qualify in civil service examination. So, you know, they kept the age of civil services very low, 23 years. And it went to lowest 19 years. This and examination was held only in UK. They knew Indians would not travel. This only in 1922 examination for the first time was held in India in Allahabad. First time. This is so they tried their best to not associate, covenanted services, non-covenanted services. Even education system was also criticized. Modern education they introduced to favor themselves. This, so that way we can consider. But these things we'll talk when we'll take civil services. Role of civil services, the topic that we have. Administration or civil services part, there will teach. Here we'll keep it just limited to our constitution, evolution of this constitution and some features related to that. We will summarize in brief, so let's write on this. So, only we'll focus on summary we'll give, then we'll focus on this, we'll focus on this, this and this. 4 such components. So, let's write on this. The evolution of constitution. The evolution of constitution started with the foundation of Regulating Act 1773. 1773. And it continued till 1935. Continued till 1935. There were broadly 2 phases. In evolution. First, the phase of centralization. From 1773 to 1853, and second from 1858 to 1935. In phase first, steps were taken to centralize powers, which foundation was laid down, by Regulating Act 1773. That first, the governor of Bengal was designated as Governor General of Bengal, and made superior to governors of Bombay and Madras. Next, it laid foundation for a centralized administrative system, which was further strengthened further strengthened through first Pitt's India Act by creating a dual structure of government, Second, Charter Act 1833, by within that first designating Governor General of Bengal as Governor General of India, and second, divesting legislative powers of divesting legislative powers of Madras and Bombay. However, such act of centralization was considered as one causative factor for revolt in 1857. Hence, the British government changed its strategy. To control the affairs of India. And therefore, in phase second, the approach was to associate Indians through decentralization. For instance, first, Government of India Act 1858 came to be known as Act of Good Government. Because of following factors. First, the affairs of India came directly under the control of British Crown. A separate functionary known as Secretary of State was made responsible to Indian affairs. Next, the Secretary of State controlled Indian affairs through Viceroy, crown. This. So basically, let's say that he was member of a British cabinet. This, and he was made responsible to this. So that in a way introduced a kind of responsible government. And this became basis for good government. That is the basis. So let's write next point. Through British Parliament, British Parliament, the Secretary of State was made answerable to Indian affairs, which gave opportunity to members of parliament, especially from Indian origin, members of parliament, especially from Indian origin, to expose British colonial rule in their own country. British Parliament also, next point, British Parliament also adopted acts and also budgets for Indian affairs. Note. Even if it was an act of good government, NOTE, note. This is how we have habit of talking in that way. So, even if it was an act of good government, but the intention was not to fulfill aspirations of people, rather a colonial outlook to promote imperialism, by minimizing dissatisfaction. Let's Government of India Act 1990. Second point. Next is Government of India Act 1990. It is known for following provisions. First, introduction of a system of direct elections. For the first time. Next, bicameral legislature was created. For center and provinces. Next, a system of diarchy was introduced. In bracket you can write transferred and reserved subjects. transferred and reserved subjects. Significance. It is this act which assumes special significance for modern Indian democratic polity. As it provided basis for an elected government and an early stage idea of responsible government. If India had at all any democratic experience of running an elected government or legacy of parliamentary democracy it was Government of India Act 1919. As elections were held and it continued to remain in effect. Elections were held and it continued to remain in effect till independence, till 1947. In bracket, Government of India Act 1935 did not come into effect. Except some provisions. Basically, let's say some less known provisions came to effect. Like say bicameral is expanded, universal adult franchise is expanded, this you can consider, RBI is set up. But as far as elections were concerned, bicameral legislature concerned, so these things were governed by 1919 Act because 35 Act, the freedom, let's say, leaders of freedom struggle movement did not accept. By that time, they wanted complete independence, not this 35 Act. So they did not accept it. The federal provisions also did not come into force. So since major part of 35 Act did not come into force, so 1919 Act continued till 1947. So if we had at all any such democratic experience of running any elected government, it was as per 1919 Act, an element of parliamentary democracy, you can say this. And that's why it is important. Plus, when we'll talk about responsible government, when we'll talk about bicameral legislature, Rajya Sabha, that time also you will realize a bit more relevance of this act, not here. Right? Why India went on adopting a bicameral legislature in which Rajya Sabha is neither Senate nor House of Lords. Isn't it? So why we adopted that kind of house? And there is a debate that Rajya Sabha power should be reduced. You should know that. Why India decided like this? Anyhow, so that debate you can consider. And you know that we chose parliamentary democracy over presidential democracy. And the basis was to adopt a system of responsible government. So historical legacy, if you see, so that way. So when a question is asked, let's say, You are asked a question. There are two ways to write. There are two components of that answer. One key, you will know some specific factuals and you will write it. But those factuals will not run to your 150 words. No. How many factuals will remember? So you need substantial aspect. This knowledge, analytical knowledge, perspective type knowledge. This will give you ability to articulate and add more in terms of significance, relevance, or relating to this act to that act. Yes. And that will be able to complete your answer. Yes. That is how. Then finally, let's take 1935 Act also. So 1935 Act. It introduced following major provisions. It introduced following major provisions. First, a federal polity with centralizing tendency, for which three lists were introduced. First, three lists were introduced. First, federal list, next provincial list, next concurrent list. Within that, residuary power was given to Governor General. Next, autonomy to provinces. Okay. Next, the representation was further expanded in terms of bicameral legislature and adult franchising. Next, provision for Constitution of Reserve Bank of India. Next, provision related to Central Civil Service Commission, Joint Civil Service Commission, and Provincial Civil Service Commission. Significance. It is known for federal polity by dividing subjects into three lists. The three lists deal with details of administrative relationships between center and provinces. Change paragraph. Schedule 7 of Indian Constitution. Is nothing but a sort of extension of nothing but a sort of extension of Government of India Act 1935. Government of India Act 1935. Hence, this act influence Indian Constitution in a very significant way. In a very significant way, which can be considered as the influence of history on Indian Constitution. It is this act which was adopted in Schedule 7, which had made or which has made Indian polity, highly centralized. This. So further we'll have tomorrow.